Hi there, it's Kim with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with another episode of the Market Monday. For this week, we're going to have a Rogue Market Top 10 style video that is going to be about the upcoming Pro Tour Modern that we haven't seen a Pro Tour since the Eldrazi Winter back during Oath of the Gatewatch. So this is an exciting time for Modern. Usually it's only Pro Tours that get the eyes. GPs aren't quite as successful at spiking prices. So for this week's episode, we are going to do a top 10 list of cards that have either recently rotated from the standard format into Modern or had a recent reprint, with the exception of number 10. So these are all cards that you should be watching for, especially on day 1 and day 2, to see if they're getting camera time, to see how well they are impacting the tournament, and you should be ready to click that buy button for these specific cards. Because like I stated earlier, we haven't seen a Pro Tour, we haven't seen the coverage of Modern to this capacity in quite some time. If you go back to old Modern Pro Tours, the prices of cards went crazy. You think Standard can has some major swings because of Pro Tour. It has nothing on what the modern economy what can occur in the modern economy. All right, so we're going to start off with an uncommon at the number 10 slot, and this is the exception to the list. This is a card that I have been speccing into both online and in paper, has a low entry point, and sees usually a 2 of or a 3 of in the sideboard of the hottest deck in Modern, which is humans, and this is Vithian Renegades. This is a 31-cent card in paper and a 5-cent card online that, again, sees play as a 2 of. Now, I usually do like sideboard cards. This is from Alara Reborn, so the amount of supply isn't that great. The set is old enough to definitely start having what we call that critical mass of demand, where it starts to outstretch the supply. And I think that even though this is just a 2 of, it's going to slowly slip underneath the radar to where it's investable, to where you can actually make a decent profit. Again, we've seen other cards very similar to this go up to the $2, $3, even $4 range. Think of cards like even Kasali Pride Mage. These are the type of cards, that's even a common. These are the cards that no one even really speculates into, and it just gets stripped from the supply line, and eventually the demand is just so great that the price goes up. So I don't think there's any risk in buying this card. I don't think it will ever go lower than the 30-cent mark. The humans decks are just everywhere at the moment, being, again, one of the most the hottest decks in a long time that we've seen, with the printing of the unclaimed territories really making a 5-color human deck viable. And a sideboard slot that fits nicely into this, that is from many years ago. I mean, pre-Zendikar, that's usually the gold standard, at least pre-Scars of Mirrodin. These are the cards that can really spike up in value. So I think that you should get in on Vithian Renegades at the low price point. You can still find copies of these in certain vendors for 20 cents. I've been picking them up on Cardsphere for 10 cents, and so those are great investments for the future if it does well, especially if it has a lot of camera time versus Affinity, which right now, if you look at the meta, there is a lot of humans is one of the top decks, and Affinity is a top deck, so we should think that this matchup should see some camera time, and if the Vithian Renegades actually does win that match, expect a good price increase in the card. On to number 9. Number 9 is a recently reprinted in the Iconic Masters. Now, I think that Iconic Masters is right at the cusp of where prices have stabilized. You can actually even see this with Oblivion Stone, that it has hit its low and it is flatlined out and just started to go up in price a few cents a day. So I think this is going to be the low for the Iconic Masters. I don't think there's going to be a lot of supply that is entering into the market from this set. It was a dismally sold set, but people were able to get in at a price point around the $120 mark that was able to just really speed up the process in which these cards entered the marketplace, as people did find it profitable to be opening boxes at 120 and selling off the cards. So anyway, Oblivion Stone is a 3 to 4 of in a lot of the various Tron decks, and it is really good right now in the meta. Tron is going to be the decks that is great versus attrition and great versus control, and those decks are starting to see a lot more play. The combo is being weeded out, and so it leaves this room for Tron to just completely run the table. Tron does very well when attrition and control are big, and Oblivion Stone is one of those key cards, especially against the attrition decks, to wipe out opposing Lilianas or even Death Shadows and Dark Confidants, etc. So anyway, I think Oblivion Stone is at its lowest price that it's been. The $6 mark is very, very low for a card that got up to I think at one point this card was up to let's check on the price from Mirrodin, got all the way up to a $72 card in the height of Modern. And again, the reprint of Iconic Master, of course, did dumb down the price, but the potential is definitely there. It hasn't had a lot of printings, just a few. It's been printed in Commander, as well as a Masterpiece, as well as now as Iconic. So Iconic really did kill the price of this card, but I expect this card to rebound. On to my number 8. Now, this card doesn't see a ton of play in Modern. It sees more play when the prison decks are big, or when there's a lot of enchantments or pesky artifacts that need to be exiled. This is Nahiri the Harbinger. Nahiri is actually played in quite a few decks. You even see it in like the Eldritch Evolutions or even some Coco Collected Company creature-based decks. Typically the Eldritch Evolution because it gives you another way to search up your combo for an infinite combo, and it's very easy to protect in a creature-based deck that runs a lot of cards like Eternal Witness or Kitchen Finks or cards that can just sit and take a beating and come back and create a lot of value, and eventually you can tick up Nahiri to ultimate. You also see Nahiri in the Madcap Experiment type decks is another alternate way to get the Platinum Imperium. We've also seen this with other Emrakul decks where Nahiri can then go tutor up Emrakul and just win the game right out there. So the reason why I like Nahiri is not because it sees a ton of play in Modern, but I think the price point is right where it's going to start stabilizing off. This is an $8 Mythic that has potential, again, to see even as much as 4-ofs in particular decks. There was a time period in Modern where this was the hottest card, and that's what actually spiked the price all the way up to $40. It didn't see a lot of play at Standard at the time, but there was enough people in Modern that were playing it that kept it at the $20 mark for quite some time. So I'm expecting Nahiri to rebound if it gets any sort of camera time. It's just one of those cards I think you should be slowly investing in, and then 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you'll definitely make that reinvestment money back plus some. And again, this is just this is one of those cards, being a mythic planeswalker, that tends to go nuts when it does see camera time. So definitely start picking up those Nahiris. Number 7. Now, number 7 could be kind of a conglomerate of cards. However, I think this is the one that I like the price point the most, and this is Matter Reshaper. Whether it be there's a lot of Eldrazi decks like the Eldrazi Tron or the banned Eldrazi. We've actually even seen some mono red Eldrazi decks see play in Modern. I've seen some mono white Eldrazi decks before see play in Modern, but the deck that it mainly goes in is Eldrazi Tron, and it's usually a 4-of, so you can compare it to Thought-Knot Seer, which has the price tag of Thought-Knot Seer is much higher. It's 3 times the price of Matter Reshaper, and then the Reality Smasher is 2 times the price of Matter Reshaper, except for, I mean, they basically all have the same numbers of play. Thought-Knot Seer gets a little more play than, and Reality Smasher gets slightly more play too, because they do see play in some of the Taxes, Death and Taxes, or Eldrazi Taxes decks. Typically, if it's in Eldrazi Taxes, Matter Reshaper also sees play, because it's just a card that it has a lot of value. When it dies, you go get a replacement card off the top of your deck, or the top card goes either onto the battlefield or into your hand, and it's even if it gets Path of Exile, that's still a land that ramps you towards running out like a bigger Eldrazi at that point. So Matter Reshaper is always one of those cards that it confuses me that it's, you know, a third to a fourth the price of Thought-Knot Seer and half the value of Reality, and they're typically the same amounts of play. And if you go into Legacy, Matter Reshaper sometimes sees more play than some of those cards. So I like the price point at Matter Reshaper. It's closest to its lowest ever. The only time that it was lower was during the height of draft. And so $2.20 is, I think, a bargain to get into a card that has proven itself as a pillar of the modern, kind of a modern staple. On to my number 6. Number 6 is an interesting card because it just shows how the meta has shifted to more of a value meta. I might actually get back into Modern. Now, a lot of you know the story of why I don't like solitaire decks. I don't like all-in combo decks. And it just was very frustrating to play in Modern for quite some time. I'd say for over a year and a half, where the format was just riddled with the combo decks. But now we're starting to see humans has really brought a whole nother dynamic. The attrition decks are getting a lot better at beating out the combo decks, and even control or tempo have had a lot of upgrades in these last few sets. So it lets a card like our number 6 Tireless Tracker really shine, because if you play one land after Tireless Tracker, it's got its value. It's a 3/2 for 3 mana that when you sacrifice a clue, it gets +1 counter, so it's one of those cards that can actually get out of hand by itself. So it reminds me of like Huntmaster of the Fells, reminds me of these other cards that just start getting residual value. And the card is starting to see play in a variety of decks. It's even been splashed into humans before. It's seen Legacy play. It really goes in the what we call the black-green rock or black-green attrition type decks, in the Scape Shift or Titan Shift decks, the Collected Company decks, Abzan decks, even Eldritch Evolution type decks have played it before. And it's just a very, very solid card when you have to play that card advantage war with the tempo or the attrition decks. So I'm thinking Tireless Tracker. I've also noticed that people want this card like crazy on Cardsphere. So that's usually a good indication of a price increase, is when there's a lot of demand. Even though I haven't really found a lot of prices that I'm willing to send it off, there still is a ton of people that want this card. So I think that getting it even at this $4 mark, you can find vendors that definitely have it for cheaper than $4, and you can find it occasionally on eBay, TCG, Amazon for a lot cheaper even than that. Or I'm sure you can find people to sell it to you, because the buy list price is still relatively low, half its value on most of the vendors. So I'm pretty sure you can compete with that and find this for a $2 mark to pick up Tireless Trackers. However, like I said, just the versatility of how many decks this goes into, and I think that it's inevitable that we do see Tireless Tracker get some camera time, and if it's impressive, I think that's the time to pull the trigger on this card. Now, typically, Shadows Rune Strat I don't like as much as Eldritch Moon or Oath the Gatewatch, because being a second set means that it has a lot less supply than being a first set. It's just night and day between the amount of supply those rares have, because it's not only was in standard for a longer period of time, but was drafted as a 3 of, whereas the second sets were never drafted or sealed as a 6 or a 3 of. So keep in mind when investing in cards, look for second sets. But Tireless Tracker, I think, just is going to see a ton of variety of decks, and that has sometimes if you see like a card that's like a 3 of in multiple decks, that's a better investment than a card that's a 4 of in one deck. So, or 2 to 3 of in this case. So I like Tireless Tracker. Number 5, this is a reprint in a recent dual deck, which I was actually surprised you can find these dual decks for very, very cheap. I'm going to have to check with my distributors to see if they have any more of these lying around, because we were getting the entire deck for $10. And this is the dual deck Blessed versus Cursed, which has a Geist of St. Traft, and it also has a champion in the deck, which both those cards have started to see a lot of play in Modern. Geist is going into these Jeskai Control or Jeskai Spirits, or they're even in the Collected Company decks, the Bant Spirits. You've even seen this in like even at the Death Shadow decks. Is another card that's playing the attrition and the anti-control, anti-tempo, and is good in both of those decks, because it's just miserable to deal with once the Geist of St. Traft if it sticks, then it's very easy to protect, and it's miserable to try to kill. So there's very few ways that make opponents sacrifice creatures. A lot of times you'll have other creatures that can take the sacrifice and protect the Geist. So Liliana is not the greatest answer for the Geist, and it's got in what I consider the best deck in Modern at the moment, which is Jeskai Tempo or Jeskai Spirits, whatever you want to call the deck, that runs Geist and Spell Queller. And then your typical Jeskai control cards, like Cryptic Command, like the Lightning Helix, and those type of cards. So I'm liking Geist a ton for a quick, not quite double up, but I think that after this tournament, especially if it wins this tournament, the meager $8.50 price tag is definitely going to go to about 12 or 13. I could easily expect this to be a $20 card post-tournament, just because it was a mythic and it has that dual deck printing, but Innistrad's far enough away. We've seen cards like Liliana go all the way up to $110. So Geist the supply isn't really there, and I even think with the dual deck, the supply, I'm wondering if the Modern Masters 3 reprint of Liliana injected more supply, or the Geist reprint in a dual deck injected more supply. But definitely go and check your Walmarts, definitely go and check your local game stores to see if they still have these on discount, because this was actually dual deck that people didn't like when it came out, and it's got some good stuff. Even has a Gravecrawler in it, and I think that's the place where you want to pick these up. If you can find a discounted dual deck Blessed versus Cursed, you're going to get your money back right there just for the amount of cards that are actually playable in that particular dual deck. Speaking of dual decks, my number 4 is also a card that is incredibly low at the moment, which is Goblin Rabblemaster. This was in the dual decks Merfolk versus Goblins. It is now down to $2, and this card is starting to see, again, a ton of play because it fights the attrition and the value and the control war by putting out usually a 2-for-1 or a must-answer threat that will just win the game in a few turns. This sees play in Goblin Tribals if they ever come back, which I do suspect they will, because I think Go Wide definitely has some advantage to playing in the format right now when we have a format just really defined by Fatal Push and by Path to Exile. So I think that we'll see a resurgence in Goblins-like strategies. We also have a decently new Goblin out of Rivals of Ixalan that has haste, another 1/1 haster that then can sacrifice later on. Those are pretty good. Anyway, but this is out of the Merfolk versus Goblins deck. It's a 2-of, so it's the lowest it's ever been, and it's starting to see a ton of play in Modern in the various attrition, black-red attrition decks. Even seen playing like Scred Red. The prison decks love it. We've seen it in even Jeskai decks. We've seen it in a lot of these. The deck that it really goes into is Packrat has been used in the deck before, but the Thoughtseize Inquisition package that wants to rip out answers and then establish an answer like Goblin Rabblemaster that even has just a few turns. It usually just takes over the game. So it's just a matter of time before this card sees more play in Modern, and $2 I think is a bargain. Now this has been a promo. It was the Buy a Box promo, and now it was in the dual decks, so yes, it has a lot of supply, but M15 usually there's not, core sets are almost like second sets. I think they're in between a second set and a first set of how much supply is out there. And so I think that on comparison, a rare that sees this much play in Modern, I think that the demand will eventually outstretch all the supply for this card. All right, so on to my number 3. Number 3 had a recent reprint in Modern Masters 2015, which I guess isn't that recent anymore. I mean, that's now almost 3 years down the road. This is Etched Champion. It's still really at its bottom price. It never really dropped much lower than where it's at now. You can still pick copies up for $3, and I think this is going to be the defining card in Affinity. I think that we're going to see a lot of the matchups like, for example, the Jeskai versus Affinity, where if we do see Affinity, that tends to be an unfavorable matchup for Affinity, but when we do see them win, it's going to be because of the Etched Champion. Now, currently, this is usually a 2 to a 3 of, with maybe one hanging out in the sideboard. I think going forward, Affinity is going to want to start running 4 of these. I think it's the best card in the deck for the particular meta we have at the moment. And again, I think this is going to have not the most impressive wins, when Affinity, a lot of times Affinity can just spit out its hand, Cranial Plating, win. But I think a lot of the grindy games that we're going to see with a lot of the decks try to answer Affinity, because currently Affinity is one of the top dogs. I think there's going to be plenty of hate for it at the Pro Tour, but I also think there will be plenty of people piloting Affinity, and we're going to see some matches where Etched Champion just really, really shines. So I think getting it at $3 is a bargain. I believe this has been like you can find these the foils from Scars of Mirrodin? Maybe not. I thought this was like a promo in one of those Walmart things, but I guess not. I'm not finding it here. But Etched Champion, I think, is just very undervalued for the potential this card has. Now, on to my number 2 and number 1. I have to explain something about this set, which I also think you should keep in mind for Rivals of Ixalan. Eldritch Moon was sandwiched in between a Master set, and it didn't really have a very good reception. And it just didn't really sell because it was sandwiched in between 2 blocks that had expeditions in it. And we've seen cards like Liliana go crazy up to the $40 mark. And I think the number 2 and number 1 are rares in Eldritch Moon that I think the sky is definitely the limit of where these cards can go. Now, the first one being Bedlam Reveler. Bedlam Reveler is just currently a $1, and what's really interesting about this is Card Kingdom is actually buying this for 80 cents. The other day they had it up for buying for $1. So the spread is already minuscule. You can pick if you can find these for lower, which I have found many copies below 80 cents. I could actually just ship them right off to Card Kingdom and actually make a slight profit right there. So we call that arbitrage, is usually the terminology when you go from one market to the next. And it's just this is just a card with, I think, no risk because it's so low at the moment, being just a buck. So picking up the Bedlam Reveler, I think, is smart. It has started to see a ton of play in a Mardu Pyromancer deck, which tries to play the Attrition War as well. So what this deck does is it tries to rip out the hand with Inquisitions and Thoughtseizes. Also has Kolaghan's Commands and Collective Brutalities and Dreadbores and Terminates. To really play, we're going to destroy everything that comes out, and then we are going to establish a threat like the Young Pyromancer or later on the Bedlam Reveler that's just going to refill up the hand, and then just flat out win the game because it's a 3/4 prowess. You cast a couple spells after that, it's going to take over the game. So I think this is a very solid deck. It's got everything going for it. It doesn't really have a lot of terrible matchups. It plays against the other attrition decks very well because of the Splash of Lingering Souls, which has usually been the Achilles heel to a lot of the Liliana strategies. The Kolaghan's Command is really good in this to just keep getting back Revelers or Young Pyromancers, and the Kolaghan's Command is also really good against Affinity, against a multitude of different decks out there. Has the Terminates and Dreadbores to take care of, and the Fatal Push is to take care of like Death Shadow. Very, very solid deck. So I'm thinking Bedlam Reveler is very undervalued at the moment. You can make that argument for Young Pyromancer, other than it did have 2 or 3 reprintings in a row, or 2, so Eternal Masters and a dual deck that bumped down the price of Young Pyromancer. But definitely keep your eye on Young Pyromancer. So Bedlam Reveler, I think, is a very smart pickup at the moment, but my number one pickup is definitely Spell Queller. Spell Queller currently is sitting at $7 in paper and $5.51 online, and the reason why I like this card is because it just sees an insane amount of play in multiple modern decks. So Jeskai Control, like I said, sometimes they can build Jeskai Control as a Torrential Gearhulk route where they're only playing Snapcasters and Torrential Gearhulks, but the vast majority are this kind of Jeskai Tempo deck that is going to run the 4 Spell Quellers. So it's going to run Geist, Snapcaster Mage, Spell Queller, and followed up with Lightning Bolts, Paths, Serum Visions, Helixes, Cryptic Commands, and it just tempos out the game quite effectively. There's a lot of sideboard different variety you can build. Can have answer for combo, attrition, aggro. It's just a very, very, very solid deck. And usually pro players typically gravitate towards decks that they can outplay their opponents. Rather than just rely on the deck, they want to rely on their skill level. And this is definitely in the right hands a very high skill intensive deck to play. You got to know when to Cryptic Command or Electrolyze or do these sort of control type spells. And it's just about, sequencing them correctly and figuring out the best way to kind of tempo out your opponent. So Spell Queller is a 4 of in that deck. We also have Bant Company, which Spell Queller is a 4 of in this deck. It's actually the only 4 of next to the combo of the Devoted Druid and the Vizier of Remedies. Noble Hark as well as in there. But you can see the rest of the 3 slots. This is the one that they typically want to hit off of a Collective Company, being a way to counter a spell and then get the tempo going from there. So there's 2 major decks that it sees a 4 of in, and then there is even decks like the 5-color aggro deck that is running Spell Quellers as a 3 of or 4 of, that is just the Ancient Ziggurat and City of Brass that is just trying to go very similar to humans, but instead of going into a tribal, just running basically every creature that is good right now in Modern. And so it actually fits this package. It fits is as good as any of these other undervalued cards like Anafenza or Voice, and they are playing it in there, and it's basically solidified a slot. It also sees play in a lot of these spirit decks that I wouldn't be surprised to actually see a spirit deck that tries to get out the old school Spirit Lord that gives hexproof and +1/+1 to all spirits. We have cards like the Selfless Spirit right now in the format. You still have Geist, for example. We have a lot of good 1-drops. There's the human strategy, the Ancient Ziggurat and the Unclaimed Territory and Caverns of Souls. I just think it's a matter of time before Spirits is tried in that aspect, because there's actually some good spirits in even red and black and green from back in the day. So eventually I think we're going to see a deck like that happen. But there definitely is other Bant spirits that does see play every now and again in Modern. Just a ton of decks that do run. Oh, Knight of the Reliquary combo actually runs the Spell Queller in that deck too, because it's just a really powerful tempo strategy. So I just don't think the Spell Queller can stay at that price tag. I think this card sees almost as much play as like even Snapcaster Mage, and that was a rare in Innistrad, which I probably Eldritch Moon has more supply out there than Innistrad, because Innistrad was right before kind of the new world of Magic, the Ravnica forward, where they just printed standard sets into Oblivion. They wanted to avoid standard sets going out of print during their standard season, which we saw with New Phyrexia, and that's why they changed it during Return to Ravnica, so that would never happen again, that they keep printing till demand. And so we have a lot of supply going forward, but Eldritch Moon was actually one that sold off pretty quickly. I couldn't get it from distributors or from Wizards, I think even right before rotation. So it's just this, I don't think this was printed that much. If this would be a good one to talk to Rudy now that he has a cease and desist notice from Wizards, but it'd be very interesting to know the supply of Eldritch Moon, say, compared to Shadows of Innistrad or Battle for Zendikar, because I think it's quite lower. And we saw that reflected in the price of how much Liliana got up to, even though Liliana hasn't seen the most amount of play in Standard. We're talking about Eldritch Moon, Liliana, or in Modern. Usually it's a one of. But anyway, that's my picks for this week, or for this week's Market Monday. Definitely keep your eyes glued. You know, I might do a better edited video of this. I was going to edit this video, and then I'm like, it works out pretty well just showing these. We'll get to a more edited, maybe for the Rogue Market. We'll do a Pauper list of cards that I'm investing in Pauper. Let me know in the comment section what you're looking at for the Modern Pro Tour, what your specs are, and yeah, just stay glued to the day 1 and day 2, especially the things that are posted on camera. They tend to even spike even if they don't do well. So just some food for thought. Anyway, this has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.